Hey, now it's the Rob from 106.1 KISS FM here with my 16-bit colleague.
Hey guys, it's me, Steve, web contributor to 1061 evansville.com, and in the video game Bible, we are the Genesis.
This is the book of Genesis, as we're here to talk about our first 16-bit console as far as our top 3 games go. This is the second in a series of features where we're going to focus on one console per week and talk about some of those consoles' shining examples of great games. Last week we talked about the NES. As you can tell, I am an original gamer. By the way, of course, we are the best dressed podcast on the internet. Today we'll be focusing on the Sega Genesis. The Sega Genesis was a console that really gave the Nintendo a run for its money, Steve.
Yes.
It really challenged the Super Nintendo specifically on every front, and while it was not perceived as the winner of the 16-bit wars, video games were left forever changed because of Sega Genesis's impact on video games.
Yes.
It kept Nintendo honest, it kept them on their toes, and some really great games came out in the process. I have a few honorable mentions that didn't quite make my list. I just wanted to throw out there.
Okay.
Games like X-Men, or a game you can only find on Sega Genesis, where that had stepped things up big time, I feel like, in the superhero world. And another one that I wanted to mention that didn't make my list, but was an early success on the Sega Genesis, one you could only find on Sega Genesis, one that gamers would often use to show off a 16-bit console, was a game called Altered Beast.
No, that's actually on my list.
Okay, so we'll talk about it here in a second. You want to get things started with your third favorite game?
Third favorite game, I'm a fan of Barbarians, I'm a fan of He-Man, so I'm going to go with Golden Axe.
Golden Axe, I thought about putting on my list too. That is another great game, in my opinion, an example of one. It was an early game that people would show off the console for.
Yes.
What are your memories of Golden Axe?
Again, being a fan of Barbarian, if you know me from watching these videos, you know I love the side-scrolling beat-em-ups. I could actually play as Axe Battler, the big blonde buff guy that I will never be.
Stop.
But just going through this fantasy realm and battling bad guys, and you have your girlfriend and you have the dwarf that travels with you, and just a fantasy, and it's one of those that you could really escape reality and get into. It's
funny because you said that knowing what you're into, it's not a surprise that you'd be into a game like Golden Axe. Knowing what I'm into, it's not a surprise that my game is also in at number 3. What I'm into is things like effeminate pop stars. And the only place you're going to find a game called Michael Jackson's Moonwalker was the Sega Genesis. Now, this is a game I did not play a whole lot of as a kid growing up. I have the game now, but I feel like this is a game that was A, a lot of fun, B, it was one of those early games that people would use as an example of what the games were capable of. But one thing that the Genesis could do better than Nintendo, one of those very few things in the 16-bit generation, was produce music.
Yes.
The music was much better, typically, on Sega Genesis in any case. When graphics were better on Super Nintendo, the sound played better on the Genesis. And they would do some things differently. Like, for example, when it was sweat on the Super Nintendo in Mortal Kombat, it'd be blood on the Sega Genesis. There were some things that Genesis did what Nintendo don't, as they used to say in the advertising field. Music was always better, and it was cool having someone I really like, a celebrity like Michael Jackson, and his music and the premise of his music videos. Being able to play that in my bedroom was cool. So number 3 on my list is Moonwalker, Michael Jackson's Moonwalker.
All right.
What about you, Steve? Number 2.
My number 2 is actually a number 2, and I think we briefly discussed this last time, Sonic the Hedgehog 2.
Okay. Sonic the Hedgehog 2 is actually my number 2 game as well.
All right.
I'm only choosing one game per franchise, so we can just go ahead and collaborate on this one, because that's strange. In the same, Sonic was Genesis.
Yes.
Sonic was so important to Genesis's longevity. There were so many great games, but the number 1, it seems like we agree on this, was Sonic 2.
Yes, definitely.
What are some of your memories of Sonic 2?
Sonic 2 is just frustration. As much as I love to play it, it was so frustrating. But again, if I think Sega Genesis, like you said, you have to think Sonic And I mean, Sonic 2 was the best incarnation of that franchise.
2 words, Steve: blast processing.
Yes.
The game was fast. Sonic was fast, and that was what they tried to cram down our throats. And for us as kids, it worked.
Yes.
We believed the game was playing at a faster rate, which it slightly was, but nothing really to crow about. But the game took what Sonic 1 was a great video game.
Yes.
Do not get me wrong, but Sonic 2 took it and built on it.
Yes,
It added a sidekick, Tails.
Yep.
Miles Prower is his real name. And you could play as Tails. A friend could play as Tails. You could do a weird sort of competitive mode, or you could go in that 3D tube if you remember.
Yeah,
Man, the way that it built upon the first one was such a home run. And Sonic 2, it looks like we both agree. Cheers to Sonic and Tails. So what's your number 1?
My number 1 is, again, the original Pac-In game. I love it. Altered Beast.
Altered Beast, okay, a great game. Obviously, I put it in my honorable mentions. What do you think about that game?
I mean, again, the fantasy realm. I mean, I got into video games because it gave me an alternate reality. I could really, just escape from it and get into these games. And
from the luxury of our own homes, like that,
yes.
I just love
yes.
not leaving.
Yes, I mean, when I first started playing Altered Beast, it was from the arcade in the mall.
Mm-hmm.
If you remember that. I mean,
that was before my time, but I know it existed.
Yes, it existed, and I was there, and then it transitioned to home. And I got to play it whenever I wanted. I didn't have to keep plunking quarters into it. So I could change into a werewolf or a dragon whenever I want.
That cutscene from when it would change from a human
yes.
into a beast was the best graphics we had ever seen in our home
yes.
at that point in time.
Yeah, definitely.
That was a very important game in the history of the Sega Genesis, without a doubt. One you still hear about today. Like, people still bring that game up in conversations about top games, as we did today. My number 1 favorite game on the Genesis was such a unique experience. I'm sure I've mentioned this game in the past on the 16-bit Superstars. I forget, have you ever played Toe Jam and Earl?
I have, yeah, I've played them.
God, I love that game.
Yes.
It was the goofy 90s silliness.
Yes.
It was targeted right to my age group. It was cooperative yet slightly competitive gameplay. It was never the same experience twice. Basically, the way it worked was so simple. These 2 funky aliens, they loved to rap music and they loved to dance,
yes.
crash landed on an Earth-like planet, and they lost 10 of their spaceship pieces. So you have to go through 20 levels trying to find, on every level, a spaceship piece and an elevator to the next level. But not every level has a spaceship piece. Only half of them do. So as you keep getting higher and higher, the levels keep getting harder and harder. And there's certain power-ups and tools that they give you along the way. So much in humor. And to me, it was just my favorite experience on the Genesis, without a doubt. It was one I did not have to think about which went where. I knew my favorite game on the Genesis was Toe Jam and Earl.
Yeah.
So there you have it. Well, we feel, I guess it's not 6 this time, it's only 5 because we agreed on
yes.
Sonic 2 of all games.
Yeah.
But what we feel are the best games on the Sega Genesis. And I'm excited for next week because I think my all-time favorite console, Steve, is the Super Nintendo.
If it's not my favorite, it's up there. It's
yeah.
top 2.
So you want to talk about our 3 favorite Super Nintendo games next week?
I look forward to it.
We will do it next week. Thank you for tuning in to the 16-bit Superstars. We will see you later. For myself, the Rob, and for Steve.
Thanks, guys.